Ladies and gentlemen, we are so back. LEC 2025, G2 Esports, caught in a bit of a low actually at this time, but games are the bangers nonetheless. There is some shining hope to these players, and the games are still just as hype as I remember, despite G2 coming off to a little bit more rougher start than what we would like to see normally come out of them. But the point of this channel is to kind of highlight the magic of League of Legends and other esports and just surrounding that, and why teams do what they do, and why that kind of hashes out the way it does. And we're gonna jump into this game and give you a great example as to what happens in the early season. So LEC so far not using the fearless draft format for I believe the first 3 weeks that every other major region is currently deploying. So we get to see a bit more of a traditional sort of look from a draft perspective as to what the teams are going for. There's less stakes, there's less sort of to think about in terms of draft. It gets very, very complicated once you get into those layers, and then you can go for certain openers, and then because of those openers in previous games, then it opens up other styles for new games. So there's a lot of load on the coaching staff side in order to be able to adapt to these situations. And I think there's a lot to hash out in terms of it creates so many more layers to draft, and it makes it so much more volatile and exciting, and it's a pretty good change overall. So I look forward to seeing these same teams trying to deploy those strategies in the coming weeks. Maybe G2 is a fearless draft demon team. Who knows? We don't really know that at this time. So jumping to this game, the early season is always about being able to get the best meta read, understand what makes the most sense, and seeing the field of viable champions, then identifying what's good. In the case of G2, they open up with a Vi opener. And this is a little bit of a carryover from the changes from last season. There hasn't been too much of a meta shift, I would say, in terms of what's been prioritized. If you were following last year, especially towards the end, it's a lot of the same thing. There's going to be a lot of lane swapping as well, and this reflects the priorities that teams will go for and things of that nature. So G2 go with the Vi opener. Of course, while this guarantees a certain level of engage, and this is why teams have been coveting this pick in terms of being able to open it as early as B1, the caveat is, of course, it is only as good as engage is in the current field. And this is a classic case, right? So this basically sets up the field for BDS to basically create themselves as much defensive tools as possible in order to answer this Vi, and that's essentially the answer. G2 could be cognizant of this. They're a very dynamic drafting team. They could be drafting not only for champions and just what's objectively good, they could also be drafting for what they think BDS could struggle with stylistically. However, I do think a normal front-to-back style is something that most teams are able to kind of thrive off of. I don't really think that's the case in this case, but there are some times where that could be possible. So G2 follow up with Kalista Renata. I would say nothing out of the ordinary. We've been seeing a lot of similar priorities as well. Something that's come up in the offseason is the Skarner. That's been absolutely insane. Just a free B1, works in every composition, as well as the Corki. So there's been a little bit of mix here and there, as well as some other funny stuff like Tank Jace coming out. Some teams have been prioritizing that in some regions very heavily with a lot of poke. There's a lot of poke in the current field, and there's a lot more spice, let's say, as options get removed and things get picked. But in a field like this, you can see very standard responses. So BDS basically reveal nothing in a way by just going K'Sante on 1-2 as well as getting the Varus priority. So they've basically set themselves up for the front to back they're looking for. And you can see where G2 tends to struggle in terms of a draft perspective is because they like to limit test with a lot of their drafts. It's not in a bad way by any means of the imagination, right? It's great. They play to their ability. They draft around their ability because they're such a strong team fighting team. They really know how to manhandle the map, especially. And, compositions with high execution scale with the skill of the team. Sometimes drafts that don't make sense on paper, they make sense to teams like G2 or T1 because their game knowledge and their ability to, handle these champs and just pilot these compositions is next to none. And that's why contextually it can make sense. So we see the Ambussy come out into the K'Sante, one of the newer players in the space because for ability to just win those extended trades, basically be DPS K'Sante. They're just going to be dashing all over the lane. And while we're at it, we might as well throw the Sylas in there too. With the Seraphine come out though, I love this pick and this adaptation from BDS to basically answer the priority, the historical priority picks from G2, right? If you think about Kalista Renata, it is quote unquote, good in a vacuum. It's great into most scenarios, into most lanes, but it struggles against things that can slow it down, right? You think the Ashe, you think the Varus, it gives it a lot of problems, right? So you combine that with the Renata, who tends to be one of the most blindable enchanters, especially with Kalista, but weaker against other enchanters. So you double down on this, push your support counter pick back, and then you create a new win condition that not only sets you up for this, but also gives you the scaling. It gives you good laning and it gives you good team composition. The only X factor would be lane swaps, and if that causes any issues. But by and large, this is an excellent play from a draft perspective, right? And you can kind of see, even though for a team as good as G2 and a team as as able-bodied and volatile and being able to just command a lead, even a team like this, they can't turn water into wine. They're going to struggle a little bit. And I have a couple of examples here for you. They get great advantages in the early game. You can see the power of their champions here. The onus is definitely on them to create their advantage, right? But they set themselves for a lot of counter picks. So BDS really maximized the power of Red Side in order to basically set themselves up for success, like higher percent chance plays from a comp perspective. And after a certain point, it's just becomes too easy to pilot, right? You can't break the logic of the game no matter how good you are, right? There are some things that just have to be true. But you can see here, G2 play really well. They're using their early game advantages, even into the Varus Seraphine. They know it doesn't have the mobility, so they can gain force leads where they can. And typically teams like this, they take that lead, they shove it down the enemy's throat so that there is no escape, right? There is no way you're getting out of this. And that's usually how you bail yourself out of a bad draft. You just have the 3 winning lanes. And is that the case here? Arguably, but they're certainly playing like that, right? So with that sort of priority, that's how they see it. I have another timestamp here, 37:40, where you can see, I'm not sure if this was a bit of a fumble from BDS, because I swear they see G2 literally walk up from the wave. So I believe this is consensual. Is that the way to say it from BDS? Like, they were down to take this fight. So it's possible that there was a little bit of miscommunication from the side of BDS in terms of a team fighting perspective, especially when you have an enchanter support. So it's a little bit awkward. And this whole fight is basically G2 thriving in the chaos. They know how to make these snap decisions in order to essentially get what they want out of it, and then they just blow the game wide open with this, right? Lovely stuff, right? But this is the thing, we could be in a wrong meta read, right? I believe we're actually in a phase where if you're looking at the field of champions that are good, it's really hard for G2 to kind of play after a certain point, right? And it could be just the total game runtime, and the effects of the new season changes just make it really hard for G2 to play. Look at this. Even though they had such a commanding lead, it was very, very hard for them to finish off. It just looked like BDS didn't do anything particularly amazing this game, right? It was just that, guys, our champs are big now. It's been 20 minutes. We're blessed. And we're just here now, right? And even though G2 probably deserved to win in terms of the plays made, that is not always the case here, right? There's 2 dimensions to it. There's always how well you execute your decision and whether it was the right decision. And, G2 are maxed out on, execution. But in terms of from draft and the right champions for the right tools, it doesn't really look like it's very easy to play. And that's basically what I'm seeing here. So I could see that. I think the biggest thing with G2 right now, it could just be they're going to reprioritize what they think is good. And I'll give one more example of this at 42:15, the last one showing. You can just see after a certain point, the game just gets to 25 minutes, and it's really hard for them to really do anything anymore because of the lack of damage to be able to melt through the front line. And while it's totally understandable, right? This is not a bad state for G2 to be in terms of overall within the field. They can just like make that adaptation. They have great structure in place. They know these players are so experienced. I'm sure there is no issue with with the problems that they think they're having at this time. So I don't really think this is something to flag. But for this game, of course, were these the best tools for the job? Who knows, right? If we were going by results, probably not. But I think G2 can just kind of come back from this and identify what's right. So essentially, that's the breakdown of this game. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys why G2 could be in this little bit of a slump in the earlier phases of the LEC. But I look forward to covering more different games, and you get more data on what teams are going for. We haven't seen Tank Jace; it was dropped completely this game. I don't want how that changes the entire meta, or Fearless Draft, and how that maybe G2 could thrive there. So looking forward to covering that with you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.